wasn't born here. I've been here a long time, but I wasn't born here. When I came up here, but I've been a railroad nut all my life. When I moved up here in the 60s, my former wife and I rented a little house in Essex Junction on Maple Street, in the corner of Maple and Mansfield. And there was the evidence of an abandoned railroad behind our house. And when I joined the local railroad club, I started asking questions, and people just couldn't answer my questions. So I decided to start reading newspapers. I went to UVM, where they had the old Burlington Free Press on microfilm, and I started reading the newspapers. And then in the 90s, I decided I've been doing this for a long time, I ought to learn how to do this. So I started taking history classes at UVM, which turned into a master's degree in history. Still, I don't know nothing. I'm here to talk to you about the Burlington Lamoille Railroad in Jericho and Essex, and I'm hoping you will talk to me about the Burlington Lamoille Railroad in Jericho and Essex, because I didn't grow up here. I don't know this stuff unless you tell me. So questions are encouraged. I'll try to answer them as best I can. And if you know something I don't, please let me know. But I'm going to tell you a lot of stories. Okay. My brains. This is an advertising, other button. This is an advertising brochure the railroad put out, and you're supposed to think that this big black line, dark line here, where are we? All the way to Portland is the Burlington Lamoille Railroad. Madison Avenue advertising didn't start last week. It's healthy right here in 1882. The B&L is this little piece right here. Let's see, not even there. Right here. Just that little piece there. That's all the B&L is. Why build that railroad? That was one of the questions that people couldn't answer for me. Well, it turns out, next slide, please. The B&L is a pre-Civil War idea. Portland, Maine, way over here, is a day closer sailing, in sailing times, is a day closer to Europe than Boston. And they're a warm water port, so you can get in and out of there all year long. And so they want to take over as the main port on the East Coast from Boston. But in order to do that, they need a connection to the Great Lakes. Now, Boston has got a connection to the Great Lakes. It doesn't show on this map, but Boston's, yeah, here it is. This is the Rutland, and this is the Central Vermont Railroad, and they go up here, and they connect with Lake Champlain, and you take ferries across, and you can get on this railroad here, and here's Ogdensburg, which is the eastern end of the Great Lakes navigation system. There's some kind of falls here, or it gets too narrow. I really don't know why, but Great Lakes ships could go all the way up to Ogdensburg. So Portland wants that connection. But when they propose this, the important port on Lake Champlain is Burlington. So when originally in the early 1860s, somebody proposes this idea, they're talking about this. Actually, not really that, but more or less that. Oh, no wonder that's the middle. Thank you. Oh, this is going to be a challenge. See? Now, this is not a canned talk. Okay, so what do we got here? Okay. So, yes, the story begins before the Civil War, Portland, Maine, all of that stuff. Yeah. Lake Champlain was too wide to bridge, so you had to use ferries. Okay. So, the war comes along, Civil War comes along, the whole idea is shelved. It's after the war that people start doing this. It takes till about 1875 for the B&L to get its act together. In the meantime, prior to as early as the 1870s, there are people who are proposing this and suggesting where do we go. Let's see, we got to go to this map here. Next map. Okay. Yeah, this one. So here's the B&L right here. Going off this way. Up to what will someday be called Cambridge Junction. So people are talking about how do we get there? There's talk about going up Pleasant Valley. There's talk about going up this road. There's talk about going up to Georgia. Different possibilities. How do you get from Essex? Originally, they're only talking. Originally, they're talking about going from St. Johnsbury to Montpelier and then joining the Central Vermont Railroad. And I got to come over here to do this. Let's see. Yeah, here's Montpelier. They're talking about coming here and going this way and getting on the CV and going to Burlington on the CV. The Burlington, Lamoille, the CV is not too interested in that idea. So they have to do something else. Eventually, they work out a deal to get from Danville to Georgia, but and then get on the CV and come down this way. CV's not interested, Central Vermont Railroad's not interested in that either. So then they start talking about building from Burlington to Essex, and then from Essex on to Cambridge. Next map. Okay, here's a nice map that shows just railroads. This is actually composed from two different maps. There's a disjoint here. This map is more modern than this one. This map was put together after the railroad was built. This is when it was still proposed. Next, here we have Burlington. Let's see. Here's the lake. Can you hear me back there? Yep. Cool. Here's the lake. The Burlington Lamoille uses this building here, which is a Rutland Railroad building, which is not being used anymore by the Rutland. And that's where their shops and offices are. They use this roundhouse over here, which belongs to the Central Vermont Railroad, and they actually start going south out of Burlington. They go south and come up Potash Brook and across South Burlington, cross the Winooski behind where the airport is now, go along sort of parallel to South Street in Essex, if you're familiar with that. They cross through Essex Junction, go behind the Essex Middle School, and go off. And I don't really know where this road is here now, but they go behind Essex Center, downtown Essex Center, behind Hoagie's, behind the grocery, the P&C, Price Chopper.
Because the station is still there.
The station is still there.
house.
It's a house now. We got a picture of that, a couple of pictures of that. They go behind the current library, which used to be a church, and they cross the road just before you get to, what's his name? Leo's, thank you. And go behind Leo's. There's still a matter of piece. There's a little piece that Leo saved. You can actually still walk that much at a B&L behind Leo's. Went through a farm, and I don't really know where this road is. It crosses Route 15 just past Leo's, a little ways, well, just before Leo's. Goes behind him, and then it goes along the Browns River. Crosses the Lee River, and that station is still there as far as I know, but it's derelict. And then you get down into here, and here's Jericho. We got more maps. So what do we got here? Okay.
So
Yes.
by Pontash Brook, that's like 189, can you still see that bed?
What's that?
Yes,
That's the railroad bed, you can see still those sections of it.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
There's two of them beside each other, right?
And the interesting part of this map, one of the interesting things, you can see how small Burlington really is. Here's Main Street, Pearl Street, there's nothing out here. Here's Pine Street. This is all lumber. No houses down there, not much. This is Maple Street. Okay, next. Oh, we want to have this. Okay, here's Essex Junction. And the B&L will come out, here's South Street, it'll cross South Street somewhere around here, go off this way through this, and then cross through here. And I don't know what comes next. And off behind the middle school. What's next, honey? Ah, the center. Okay, here we go. The center, here's Alderbrook. Okay, it's running back here. It swings around through here and out that way before it crosses back. Because this is Route 15. Here, here, there. This is Sand Hill Road. Okay. Okay, so now I'm back on track here for a while. Next is Jericho Corners. And you really can't see it. It's down in here, coming across the Lee River, and goes into a big loop. We'll talk about that nice loop for a little later.
The railroad out of Essex Center goes behind the Whitman farm.
Sorry?
The railroad out of Essex Center goes parallel to Route 15 for a ways, then it goes across the the Whitman farm.
Yes,
Essex Center. Then it
yes,
crosses
out
Maple
behind
Street
there.
And comes into Jericho, and on the Lee River Road, where the railroad station is now.
Part of my connection to you guys, Jericho and Underhill, is Lorraine Dwyer, who a lot of you will remember, and Lorraine Dwyer's brother, Bud Spaulding, who was a railroad nut and a very good friend of mine, and he and I walked almost all of this. There's a few places we didn't quite get to. We even walked part of the swamp one winter. I don't recommend you do that.
You walked through Dean Davis's barn, did you? That's where the railroad was, right there by his manger, so you had to walk through the barn.
Yeah. Yeah, we walked through alongside that barn and out the back behind Gary Irish's father's place. And through a herd of cows, actually. I got some other stories. Okay, now, next. Here's a Gary Irish photo. Thank you, Gary. He gave me this. This is the trestle that used to cross the Lee River before the bridge was put in. And they redid this in 1897, and I'm presuming that's the vintage of this picture. This wood looks pretty raw. So I'm guessing that's an 1890s picture, 97 picture.
So is that the bridge that the abutments on Plains Road?
Beg your pardon?
Is that the bridge that the abutments are on Plains Road?
Yes, you can, used to be able to see both of them, but now they've mined some of that out. Next picture. And here they are putting in the new bridge, 1924, and there's those abutments. One of them, there's a pier. The earth went up to here, and then the bridge started here and around. Okay, and here's Jericho Station. Nope, another picture of the bridge. Here's the bridge complete. No, they're taking it down, actually. This is the process of disassembling in '38. Okay.
Why did they take the bridge down? Why did they take the bridge down?
They tore the railroad up in 1938. We'll get to that. Next. And there's the Jericho Station. Let's see. Okay. The story on this picture, as far as I know, Earl Cross, theoretically, walked down and took this picture on the last day. The tracks are gone. The tracks used to be on this side, so they're gone. But the station's still in pretty good shape. And it's not very good shape now, but it was then. It got turned into a house. Where is it? It's on Railroad Circle. If you come off of Skunk Hollow Road onto Lee River Road, there's a street sort of right in front of you.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Railroad Circle, and it's down in there. It's owned by Rick Workman. I don't know if he's still healthy or not. Gary, how's Rick Workman doing? Do you know?
We see him quite often.
You do?
Oh, yes.
Give him my regards.
Okay.
Give him my regards. The first train on the B&L, that was a first construction train, brought the first load of cars. Well, actually, when the train got here into Essex, Jericho, on May 26, 1877, the train was greeted by a brass band and some cannon, and brought the first load of merchandise delivered. And I don't have the note here about who did it. It's lost in here somewhere. Next slide, please. Here's another slide. Business is doing well. Bert Byington, Leo LaFrance, they work for the railroad, and Bert Blodgett's standing here on his crutch. Okay, now, this is called Cape Horn turn, named after a turn with the same name on the Union Pacific Railroad. Griswold Street comes out right here. Here's Lee River Road, and you have this big loop, and we have this wonderful picture here of that circle.
That's it.
Yeah, well, you'll have to look at it. Right in here, you can see the loop. Oh, good-o. Okay, you can see the loop in the trees. And comes out right here, Griswold Development. Bud Spaulding and I started over here. Back up. Let's see. At the station one day, started walking up here. When we're walking and chatting, and we get over here to the back of the Griswold Development, and all of a sudden we hear an eek, and a flash of skin. We stumbled on some lady who was sunbathing in her backyard. We didn't know we were about to enter her backyard, and she didn't know there was a way to get there. Okay.
Yeah. What about the other story?
A stranger in town decided to walk from Jericho Corners to Underhill. And he figured that the shortest way to go would be the railroad. Kind of makes sense. He didn't know the area though. So he started walking, and this is a fairly stiff uphill walk. The reason for this is because of the falls over here. This is as you know, if you drive this is sharp. This is steep. So the railroad, in order to get up that high, had to do this extra loop within a reasonable grade. So he's walking, he comes out over here, and he figures he's walked far enough to get to Underhill. So he looks off to the left and says, "Oh, I see the lights of a town down here." So he walks back to town. We're hoping he was not an anvil salesman. All right, so what do we have here left? It gets interesting. No, that's old. Okay. Here's the gravel pit. The railroad mined out gravel for ballast and fill all along the Browns River. It started at various places at various times. I have a picture that was taken behind Gary Irish's dad's place. We know that they mined it out of what is now Riverside Park. If you walk along the brook, Browns River, you'll see great quality gravel all along there. And the railroad mined it out for their own use. They sold it to other railroads. August 26, 1877, Pat Shanley, a brakeman, was riding on the side of a side drop hopper car. This is a car where the sides, instead of the gravel coming out of the bottom, the sides open up so that you can drop it on the sides of the track. Well, one of the sides was not locked properly. It opened up and the gravel started falling out. He was hanging on a ladder on the side. The gravel caught his leg and pulled him under the car. He lost a leg, but he survived. And he worked the rest of his life, his work life, as a carpenter for the B&L for as long as the railroad lasted. Next slide, please. Are you awake? Sorry. This is a boring talk, folks. This Tinker Toy Bridge, this originally would have been a trestle. But at some point in time, along about 1902, 1906, somewhere in there, the railroad took this bridge from a previous location, which I don't know where it was, and moved it over here across the Browns River at where the airport is, or was, where the Browns River crossed, and the runway was built right on the railroad track, or at least that's what people tell me. And later on, that'll be replaced by this steel bridge. Next one. Yeah, there we go. That replaced the Tinker Toy Bridge. As locomotives get bigger and bigger and bigger, heavier and heavier and heavier, you need better bridges. So that's kind of the story behind this. So what do we have left here?
Where was that? Over near the Jericho Essex line?
No, that was at the end of the runway where the railroad crossed Browns River.
Right across the
Sort
road.
of behind Mountain High Pizza.
If you go out behind, this, what's the name of the place?
Behind Castle Cemetery.
Yeah, the convenience store at Jericho Corners, or at, right out here, Jolly's. If you go up by Jolly's, and if you drive into Jolly's, you're looking right at the end of the side of the railroad track. If you follow that back to the river, the Browns River, that's where that was.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you can walk a bit of the railroad right behind Jolly's. Okay, Underhill Flats. Okay. Here's the Creek Road. Route 15 down here. Now, the Creek Road didn't used to be where it is now. Route 15, they moved it. Route 15 is somewhere in here now. No, Route 15 is, yeah, Route 15 is over on this side. So the railroad went sort of right through here somewhere. And
Speak up.
the depot would be down here somewhere right off the edge.
Speak up.
Speak up. Ah, thank you. I'm trying to get myself organized. Route 15 is now over here. And here's Old Underhill Flats. And the depot would be, where's the town line?
There's the town.
Town
Town
line's
line.
diagonally right down
It's
the
right
middle.
there.
Oh, here we go. I'm lost. I'm lost. So if this is Jericho, this is Underhill. Okay. Somewhere in there. Guessing? I don't know. Myron Reed of Underhill, was hit by a train while driving cattle to his barn near Raceway. His farm was on Raceway Road. Next, Dixon House. This is where Jolly's is now. And the Dixons had a really good relationship with the railroad. Before they built the station in Underhill Flats, that was the station. They threw all kinds of parties and had all sorts of summer stuff. And there was a flag stop. If you wanted to get on the train, one of the footmen from the hotel would come out and flag the train down when it come for you so you could get on the train. If you were going to the Dixon House to stay for a couple days, the train would drop you off there. A.C. Dixon, who was the owner, was a major supporter of the railroad, had stock in it. And this place burned January 11, 1891. Next slide. Earl Cross. I'm told two different things about this picture. One person told me this is actually in Underhill. Another person told me it was in Cambridge Junction. I don't know. If any of you guys know, please let me know. He was a colorful character, Earl. There's all sorts of stories, or at least there used to be all sorts of stories about him. During World War II, when gas was rationed, he had his own rationing system. If you were a local person and he knew you, he had all the gas you could handle. If he didn't know you well, but he sort of knew who you were, he might have gas. If he didn't know you, he didn't have any gas. But he liked to take pictures of trains, specifically moving trains. Can we have the next picture? Oh, okay. Here's Earl's gas station. It's now a house. This is Route 15, and this is River Road on the way to the library. And his station was right there, and there's a moving train. But that's not what he really liked to do. Get me the next slide, please. He liked to get them as they were approaching the station. So here they are, they're in the field, just west of his place, and he's trying to get that moving train. Okay, next. There used to be a sawmill. There's been several sawmills, actually, behind where the co-op is now. There's a big building back there that used to be a sawmill. On this site was this sawmill. This was owned by, this particular picture was owned when it was owned by a guy named Darius Knight. It was also owned by, I forget his name, a guy named Howard. But neither one of these were the first sawmill on this site. The first mill was started by two Burlington guys by the name of Richardson and Gilbert. They were not particularly successful. They were in business for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And when they went out of business, E.S. Whitcomb and Buell Day, who were store owners near there, bought them out, took it over, ran it for a while. Eventually, their mill went out of business, and I forget who bought it. You'll all know who bought it. Next slide. There's Howard's mill. And the next one, this is the locomotive Lamoille. That was one of the B&L locomotives. You're familiar with locomotives where the tender swivels in the back and is separate, kind of separate from the locomotive. On this locomotive, the tender's hooked on. And this is what swivels. And these are called Mason bogie locomotives. The B&L had 2 of these, different styles, but 2. This has 4 driving wheels, 2 leading wheels, 6 what they call trailing wheels. There's a nice story about that locomotive. Riding in that thing was an adventure, not lightly done. There's a cab on it, but there's no windows. It rocks and rolls. It was not particularly steady. It bounced around and danced on the track. The first lady to arrive in this city via the Burlington Lamoille Railroad was Miss Robinson, formerly of this place, meaning Burlington. She now lives in Underhill. She came Tuesday evening on the locomotive Lamoille. That story fascinated me. She was something else. That was a courageous young lady. I started to try to do some genealogy. I looked at censuses, I looked at microfilm, I read Jericho history, I read Underhill history. Whoever I found was either too young, 12, 13, not old enough to do that, or too old, too mature, too mature. Couldn't find anything. There was a Robinson family that lived in Westford, on the Westford town line, Westford Underhill town line, where Route 15 crosses into Westford. Right in there, there was the Robinson found. I checked out the Robinsons. She was not part of the Robinsons. That left the possibility of looking at the Burlington census. When I did that, I had so many people, young ladies, I couldn't tell. 10, 12 of them. That was no help. Years later, recently actually, I started researching that lumber mill, found out about Robinson and Gilbert. Robinson. Oh, Miss Robinson. Went and looked at the Burlington census where Robinson lived. Found Norman Robinson, who was the Robinson who was involved. He had a daughter. Her name was Eliza. Hello, Miss Robinson. Mystery solved. I love those things. Okay, next. This is the Mansfield. This is the other Mason bogie, and you'll notice it's got 6 driving wheels. No leading wheels, 6 trailing wheels. Businesses in Jericho in 1892. This comes from a document that I borrowed from the Underhill Historical Society. Edward E.W. Curtis, lumber. L.B. and F. Howe, flour. This is Jericho. A. Field Jr., wooden pipes and pumps. This guy in Jericho, made wood pipe to put between your well and your house. Or if you were smart enough, maybe for a sewer at your toilet.
Oh, he didn't hear that. Somebody said something.
Oh, what's that?
Oh, his name was Anson Field.
Anson Field, yes.
The pump
Yes.
tower, water tower was there from the village of Jericho.
As a matter of fact,
And the pump road, you see his name because of the making of the pipes and the pump.
yep.
And the station was there on his.
And he tested his pumps. The Underhill the Jericho Historical Society's great picture of his place. And there's this big water tower. And what it is he's using that water tower to test his pumps to see how high the pump will pump the water. There's A.S. Wood, Thomas Buxton, making cheese boxes. H.N. Percival, General Store. Jordan Brothers, General Store. B.W. York, Grocer, and F. Beach, Merchant. And in Underhill, we have J.R. Booth, Lumber. Darius Knight was a partner of Booth. D.L. Terrell, that's Darius Knight's alt partner. Underhill and Jericho Cheese Factory, which was owned by Buell Day. H.O.W. Hipple, Cattle and Livestock. George W. Terrell, General Store. G.A. Terrell, General Store. T.B. Barnum, syrup and sugar. And this guy bought enormous quantities of sugar and syrup to ship wherever he shipped it. In the newspaper, it's reported frequently in the spring. And he also bought potatoes and shipped potatoes. L.P. Cushing selling charcoal, and Homer Thompson Hardware. Next slide. Here's a track, a little piece of the B&L track behind Hayden's store in Riverside. Chauncey Hayden store. Okay, next. Here's Underhill Flat Station. I don't know why I'm so lucky. I don't have very many pictures of Essex Station. I don't have very many pictures of the Jericho Station. I have a few more pictures of the Cambridge Borough Station. Not much from Jeffersonville, not much from Jericho, Cambridge Junction, but I got tons of pictures of the Underhill Station. I don't know why. More than half of the pictures I have of stations are from Underhill. And here's a wonderful picture. I don't know what this is back here, but there's a water tower.
That's where they kept the hand car.
That's, okay. All right.
That makes
They,
sense.
I noticed this station, picture of the station looks the same as the other station that used to own it. So did they like make the stations all look the same?
Yes, Lindsley designed the station, and I haven't mentioned him. Daniel Lindsley is a Vermont civil engineer who is the spark plug behind building this thing. He gets out and he beats the brush for money. He's the chief engineer. When it's being built, he's the president, he's the general manager, he does a little everything. And he's a civil engineer, designs these buildings. They all kind of look alike, but he hires local people to build them, and no two of them are exactly alike. Some are a little longer, some are a little shorter, some have a different style of bay window. They're all over. Here's some kind of a building over here behind, some kind of a shed, and here's another one. And that might be a handcar house, but somehow it doesn't look right to me. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. I never saw that until I blew this thing up big enough to see it back there. The first train to Underhill arrived on June 4th, 1877. Okay, next. Oh. Okay. Here's the fire. We have a little problem with our cards here. Okay, here we go. 1906. Fire started in Walter Grace's house about 11 o'clock. Destroyed his residence, the residence and drugstore of Dr. Nye, the Methodist Church, and the Grange Hall. However, the townspeople did a great job of trying to prevent the fire from getting any worse. Somebody wired Burlington for a fire engine, and the Burlington Fire Department came out here on the B&L in 35 minutes, which is kind of like record time. They arrived about 1 o'clock in the afternoon with the help of 9 firefighters who thoughtfully also brought some rain. The fire was under control by 5 o'clock. Kind of decimated things. There's somebody safe laying there. Next. Okay, now we go back to this. Underhill Flats, Park Street, Farrell and Feed Company. So we're looking, Jacob's Store is right here. So we're looking towards Route 15. Here's a nice sign. December 29th, 1881, the train struck the sleigh of Mr. and Mrs. Terrell at Underhill Flats Crossing. Neither was seriously hurt. Next. Here's Underhill Station with train number 57 back there. This car, C.C. Abbott, Clinton Abbott, sold Oldsmobiles. That's what that is. And this is Lillian Cross. Or at least that's what I've been told. The car is about a 1908, 1910. Next, and here's Clinton Abbott with his kids in his car. Next, please. Engine 207 at Underhill Flats. This was scrapped in 1926, so this picture is before that sometime. Next. And here's some more, folks. This is a little later. Somebody's luggage. Milk cans. They don't start shipping milk from here until the late 20s. Somebody's wagon over here. Okay, here we go. Here's 1938, the last run. Lillian Cross and Miss, I have two names for this lady, one of these ladies. Tilden or Tillison. I don't know which it is. This is an Earl Cross photo. According to Cross family history, Mrs. Cross's father, John Giard, was a Jericho blacksmith, and he was under contract to make spikes for the railroad. It said that he arranged for Lillian to ride, his young daughter, to ride on the first train on an open flat car where they screwed a chair to the middle of the flat car, and she rode in the chair on the first official train. She also rode the last train. Okay, thank you. Next. If you go out Route 15 past Underhill Flats, there used to be fish ponds out there that a guy who worked at GE, who I knew by the name of Red Davis, his real name was Henry Davis, and he had fish ponds out here, and he ran a fish nursery. And the railroad ran right behind it. And you can still, the ponds are all filled now, but you can still see the depressions out there if you're looking for them. Okay, and then just past here, there's a nice little wreck. You have some pictures about that down there. 1910, December 31st, 1910. The day before, well, the swamp was all frozen over, but the day before was very, very warm. And the water the ice began to thaw, and the pond began to raise, and it raised up the ice, some of which floated over onto the track, and then it froze again that night. We all know how that happens. And so when the train came chugging along, the glare from the ice blinded the engineer. He rode up on the ice and fell off the track. Henry Knox. Next slide. Here we are, the following summer, pulling the engine out. They built this guy here and hoisted the engine up directly up. Next. Here we are. Next. Here it is, pulled out of the swamp. With a poem. I am engine Central Vermont engine number 328 that ran off in the mud while hauling freight. It was down near Underhill that I drove down into the slime, and Colonel Knox was boss of me at the time. He tried his best to hold me in check, but nothing could keep me from having a wreck. There we are. There are rumors it's still in the swamp, but it's not. There are rumors that the tender is still in the swamp, and it probably is. It probably just wasn't worth enough money to drag it out. Next. And there's Henry Knox himself, an Underhill man. Next. And here you are. What would you do on a nice summer afternoon? You go to a picnic and watch them pull the wreck out of the swamp. There it is right there. And back there, you may be able to read these names. This guy was a photographer, and he probably set this up. Henry Holmes. So he probably set this up. Underhill, Jericho, Cambridge guy. Okay. Next. I believe that railroaders in those days were heroes. Here we are. This is before air brakes. The only way to put brakes on was by hand. They would string 3 or 4 cars in a row, and for every 3 or 4 cars, you'd have a brakeman. So he had to set these brakes and walk this ramp while the train is still moving over and get this one. And probably somebody else was getting that one, but he probably did this one too. December 1885, Dick Dodge, brakeman on the B&L, fell from a moving train, landed on his head. At first he thought he would recover. Also, today we have what are called knuckle couplers. And with knuckle couplers, they come together like this and close, and there's a pin that will drop through each one of these so that it can't open up. Well, next, before knuckle couplers, you had, there's the Janey knuckle coupler, and you'll notice that there's this notch. This goes this way. There's this notch right here. Okay, so that you can use the previous coupler too. Next slide. Link and pin. Here's a link, and there's a pin. And somebody has to hold that link while the guy in the engineer backs up, and you hold it till it slips in there and drop the pin through. And most real railroaders in those days were at least missing one finger, if not a whole hand. So those guys were heroes. Dan McVeigh, North Underhill section boss, lost a finger and a thumb while coupling. He must have been accident prone because in 1888 he got hit in the head with a tie, but he recovered. Henry Knox's brother Ed of North Underhill was injured in Burlington while helping a switchman. He died. Next. Here is the North Underhill station that's still there. Doesn't look like it, looks a lot better. Somebody's living in it. I've got their name somewhere. I don't personally know them. And my theory is this is the previous station. There's a map that shows this station and a lot, and it shows an outline of a building like that, about that size, on that side. There used to be behind this building a shed of sorts that may have been that building, but it was sliding down the hill into the house and they took it down. Next. Okay, and there's the shed. Might have been that thing on the other side. Next. More shed. Ah, okay. This is purportedly an Underhill swamp picture. And certainly it sucked me in till I really began to look at it. If this was a North Underhill picture, North Underhill Station picture, at this point in time, we ought to see the station right here. And if it's a little early enough, then the other station should have been on the other side. Neither one of those are here. The other thing is that when I look at this, this is a mail car, railway RPO car, and so is this. And I can't imagine any time where the B&L had two RPO cars, trains, running in opposite directions. So that's another thing. So the other thing is that one of these engines, this one, is numbered unknown X something 01. If the 101 on the Central Vermont doesn't look like this, and 201 is a whole different arrangement. So it can't be 201 and it can't be 301. There it is. You can see the 01 over here. So,
Is that the siding that we saw in the last?
no, I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Looks like a rough
I think,
angle of the tender.
yeah, I think this is somewhere else, maybe not even Vermont. But it's in your collection, so be careful.
There's no name on either one of those mail cars. There's no name on the side of either one of those mail cars.
Yeah.
Right?
No, you can't see any names. There are no names on the engine, no names on the mail cars. I don't know. The only place, I haven't really finished my research, but the only place that I've been able to find where you have a railroad this close to a road, both running parallel, and a road dead ending at the cross there is a place in Rupert on the Delaware and Hudson. Maybe that's where this is. I can imagine the Rupert in Delaware and Hudson having that arrangement of two trains to run with mail cars that might run into each other. But I can't imagine that on the B&L. B&L didn't have that much traffic.
If you enlarge it, does that picture start to come apart, or is there enough resolution in it that you could get a?
No. I've tried actually blowing up the people and trying to get a date for the clothing, and it just disintegrates. It begins to pixelate.
Because that was probably taken with a.
Yeah, it just pixelates. You can't get enough definition of anything.
You don't have the original name.
No. It's actually on a postcard, and there's nothing on the back of the postcard.
What about Route 15 near Johnson Hardware?
Well, that's what sucks you in. You think that's Route 15, but it doesn't work. Just doesn't work. Because if this was North Underhill, the North Underhill station should be right here.
Right, no, I'm saying in Johnson,
Oh, in Johnson.
near where Johnson Hardware is now,
I don't know.
just this side of it.
Yeah, I don't know. But that's a different railroad. That would be, in those days, that would be the St. Johnsbury and Lake Champlain Railroad, which ran from Swanton to St. Johnsbury and then the Connecticut River. And the B&L joined that at Cambridge Junction, but it's not the big part of the B&L. Okay. All right. If you go along the railroad track past North Underhill Station, used to have this building, which was a work shed, and I personally believe was an old work car that was put there. But we'll never know. That's my own theory. And you'll notice it was double tracked, and there's a water crane there, and you can walk in there today and find where that was. We've been there. If you keep going, next slide, you come to where the railroad crossed Route 15 again, just over in the Westford line. That's where the DNR, this is the Cloverdale Creamery, and today, this is where the DNR garage is. That's a picture out of the Cambridge transcript. And just beyond here in Westford, next slide, this is the only wreck that the B&L had where a passenger was killed. A lot of passengers did themselves in, perhaps getting off the train when it was still moving, walking in front of the engine, trying to pass between cars, but this is the only wreck where a passenger who was actually riding in the train is killed. Lyle Wilson, this is 1902. Lyle Wilson, a 3-year-old boy, was thrown across the car, broke his neck. Next.
As long as you're talking Westford, there was a rumor that somebody told me years ago where it would be on the left side of Route 15
Yeah.
before you get into Cambridge. There's a swampy area there where the train went through, and I was told that there was still a locomotive in that swamp that went off somewhere.
No, nothing. I tried to walk through that swamp. Bud Spalding and I, Lorraine Dwyer's brother, did that piece, walked that piece, and we tried to get through that swamp, but it's too narrow. The reason it's a swamp is because the railroad cut through this hill, and there's just nowhere for the water to go. You got steep sides on both sides, and it's sort of at the crest of a little piece of land, or sink of a little piece of land, and the water just runs in there. And it's just a narrow defile. There's nowhere to hide an engine. But it is a swamp. Yeah, it's below the cemetery in Cambridge.
No, where I'm talking about would be, was it J&L Auto, I think it's called. There's a little road on the left right after that. And you go down in there, that's where the tracks went across that road. And there was a swampy area down in there. My brother lived there before his house burned. We went down in there.
J&L,
It's,
is it D&L garage?
Or is it K&L?
K&L.
Sorry.
Actually, there was a bridge there that goes across there. And while it's swampy down in there, the railroad was way up high. You can actually walk to both ends of the railroad and see where used to be able to see the bridge abutments. They're gone now, but used to be able to see the bridge abutments there. There was a bridge there over that. Yeah, you're down below. Yeah, it could be pretty swampy down there. But the railroad was up above. Okay, Cambridge. So this is a map made after the railroad was built, so we know exactly where to go. If you go, this is Route 15, and if you go,
it's pointless.
this is, 104 is now out here. And this is the old road, and that's still there. So the railroad used to cross over, and Angela's Pizza. It's right here. The railroad crossed over, and the station's back here. And then it crosses, there's a street here now, crosses that street, and there's the remnants of a bridge that we have a picture of, right there. Next. Okay, here's Cambridge Depot. Another, back in the day, this was called Cambridge Borough. To differentiate it from Cambridge Center, which we call Jeffersonville. So this is Cambridge Station, which folks knew as Cambridge Borough.
That station in Cambridge or Jeffersonville?
That's the one in Cambridge. It's a house.
My dad and I used to go with my dad, we would take milk cans every other day down to Cambridge. And the creamery was right by the railroad track.
Yes,
The train would come by and
Right.
pick up the milk.
yeah, that's right. Next.
Looks kind of familiar.
And here's Jeff. And in this case, the old road is here. Route 15 is out this way now. And here's the railroad. And the station is up here off the map. Actually, when the map was made, the station wasn't built yet. Next. And here's the Jeffersonville station. It was originally on this side of the tracks, and the man who bought it moved it over on this side of the tracks to get it closer to the road and added this. But he didn't turn it around. The bay window's still on this side. Next. Okay. The Deer Run Motel is over here. And that pond is, part of that pond is here. Route 15 runs by here now, and the river's over here on this side. The river used to run this way and go out there. And the railroad just straightened this out. Built this trestle, which is eventually all filled in. This is the locomotive Burlington and their passenger cars. Next slide. And this has no reason to be here except that it's a brand new picture I found, and you're the first people to see it in a show. This is the Burlington. Found this picture, a friend of mine actually found this picture on eBay and called me up and said, Jerry, you got to look at this. I think it's for real, and so do I. Had a friend of mine clean it up. It's a little better. And I believe that this is in Jeffersonville. This background looks familiar from Jeffersonville. Also a lot of tracks. Here's track, there's another road of tracks on the other side. Next. And this was the station, one of the stations that was in Cambridge. Nice looking building.
Is that still standing?
Sorry?
Is that still standing?
No. I'm going through my notes here and coming to that. Here we go. Built in 1886. Before that, a station that was there preceding that had very bad reviews. Let's see. Okay, this burned in the 20s. Next station, next slide. Okay. The B&L was not a rousing success. The first year it was in the black, but that was the last year it was in the black. It never paid any interest on the second mortgage bonds, and it stopped paying interest on its first mortgage bonds in 1881. And the company that built those nice passenger cars sued They won, but they settled out of court. And the reason that the way they settled out of court, the Central Vermont Railroad was owed a lot of money by the B&L, and they took the railroad in return for enough cash to pay off the Jackson and Sharp who built the cars. They ran the railroad. It still wasn't a success, but it was a good feeder for them. When cars started to come along, you had buses. And there was a Burlington gentleman by the name of Ray Nichols. He ran this bus between Burlington and Cambridge. And in 1923, he sold it to somebody by the name of Ralph Lane. Eventually, Vermont Transit buys up their franchise, and it becomes a Vermont Transit route. To try to compete with that bus, the Central Vermont, next slide, ran this little diesel electric, and guys from Jericho and Underhill and Cambridge used to ride in on that to go to school in Essex at the Essex Seminary, Essex Classical Institute. But even that didn't work out. Next slide. The last day of the B&L was June 16, 1938. Here we are turning the engine for the last run to go back. And the last slide. Here's the North Underhill station. And this truck was owned by the man who had the contractor rip up the track. And so that's after the last day, sometime in the fall of '38. Thank you very much. We got some great pictures, some great maps here. We have this picture that you can look at. And if you got any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
I'm sure that a lot of people know this, but you know from Jeffersonville to Johnson Hyde Park, 2 miles outside of Morrisville.
Right.
There's a bike path now on the old railroad train.
Yes.
In fact, there's 10 miles when you can't go between Morrisville and I think it's Danville, and then you can go on to St. John's River.
Right.
So I've ridden it, it's a tremendous experience, but maybe you can answer me something. I've heard that an engine could only go up a 3.5 grade. That's why on these bike paths of the old railroad, you never see much of a hill. In other words, an engine couldn't climb much more than a 3.5
Well,
grade. I don't know whether that's true or not.
There is a limit. Somewhere between 4 and 6.
4 and 6?
4 and 6. On the other hand, it also depends on not only how steep it is, but how long it is. For instance, it'll do easily for a short distance 6, but then it's got to level out somewhat. Okay, so you can have a railroad grade is not one steady grade. It'll start out a little steep and then shallow out and then maybe do another hump and so it sort of varies depending partly on the terrain and partly on the operating procedures. The steepest railroad in the United States was actually built down in Woodford.
Woodford.
Yeah, and what's that other town? I forget. Creeping Senility. But it's only about like 4.6% or something like that. And that's just for a couple hundred yards. But for operating reasons, the steeper it is, the more coal you gotta use, the more wood you gotta use, the more fuel, the harder it is on the engines. So you want it to be as level as possible. So, for instance, one of the most economical railroads in the United States to run is the New York Central, because it runs along the Mohawk River, miles and miles of nice level stuff, or nearly level stuff. Mainline railroads work very hard at keeping the grades around 1%, and they almost never exceed, the worst, 2%. And that's why, because it costs money, takes fuel, so you want to be as level as possible. The other thing is that you don't want to have a lot of steep cuts. One of the hardest railroads to operate in the United States was in New Hampshire across the White Mountains between
Crawford Notch. Crawford Notch.
Crawford Notch, through there.
The line into St. John's Ferry.
Right, because it was steep, snow, hard operating conditions, hard on crews, hard on workers, hard on equipment, and it cost a lot of money because you were burning up a lot of fuel going up those steep grades. So it's a matter of, and you only build it once. It might cost a lot of money, but it's only once. But if you have to burn fuel, you have to burn fuel for every train. And that could eat you up over the years. Yes?
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
I believe, and my memory isn't great, but that the two ends of tracks, Jeffersonville to Cambridge, remained open for some time afterwards.
Yes.
As well as the track coming into Essex Center.
No, well, as far as I know, that's not true. The piece between Burlington and Essex Junction goes real early. The Central Vermont Railroad, while the Burlington Lamoille was built under the theory it would be an independent railroad for all of its existence. Now, what didn't work out that way. Turns out that the Central Vermont Railroad was very influential in the B&L and eventually takes it over. The railroad opens on July 3rd, 1877. By 1888, they're already, with a contract, operating on the much more level, easier piece of the CV between Burlington and Essex Junction than their own piece that's on the other side of the river. That stays in place till somewhere in the 1880s, early 1890s, but it's torn up. The CV operates the Burlington Lamoille until 1938, all the way out to Cambridge Junction, and then tears it up all the way back, except for the piece between Cambridge Junction and Cambridge Junction. Cambridge Borough, Cambridge, and Junction. There was a man who had a farm equipment company in Cambridge Borough. Actually, the station was his building, and he used that as his office and sales room. And he buys that piece and has the St. Johnsbury and Lake Champlain service his trains. Would love to find a picture of one of the trains on there. To my knowledge, there aren't any. I have a friend who's really been looking for it and hasn't been able to find one. The Wrong Way Bridge. The story is, and I have this on pretty good authority, that the Vermont Highway Department wanted to buy that piece of track and run Route 15 on that piece of track, on that roadbed out to Cambridge Borough, out to Cambridge Junction. But they couldn't reach an agreement on money with the guy who owned it. And so when they put in the wrong way bridge, the purpose of that bridge was not to go to Cambridge, Jeffersonville. The purpose of that bridge was to go to Fairfax. But they got a little ahead of themselves. They built the bridge going off that way before they negotiated to get the track, to build the road to Jeffersonville. So, but no, that piece, but not to Essex Center. There was nothing in Essex Center to go to. As hard as it is as an Essex guy who lives in Essex Center to say that, it's the truth. There was no business. When the railroad was first built, there were 3 or 4 companies, stores that would ship stuff. But by the time that the railroad's torn up, all of that stuff is moving by truck. And most of those businesses, the whole premise that the B&L was built on was based on Civil War era thinking. What happens is that while Portland in Civil War, pre-Civil War times, is yes a day closer to Europe than Boston is, in the interim, you have the Civil War, you have a guy who invents propeller-driven submarine, propeller-driven ships by 1884, 1885, there's propeller-driven ships operating on Lake Champlain. By 1890s, there's propeller-driven ships operating on the ocean, on the Atlantic Ocean. They don't yet trust steam engines and propellers enough that they still have sails and are rigged for sails. But by 1905, they're taking the rigging out. So we've got propeller-driven ships. So the whole plan to go between the Great Lakes and Portland to get to Europe, it all blows up. And so the railroad, for that and a number of other reasons, the B&L is not really a success. And everything that what happens to the pump company? I'm blanking on the name of the guy who was making the wooden pumps. Field. By the time Anson Field is driven out of business, people aren't buying wooden pumps anymore. By 1890s, they're buying steel pumps from Pennsylvania. Anson Field goes out of business. Lead pipe, ceramic pipe, all these inventions come along and destroy the manufacturing economy in Vermont. What's happening is now you're shipping cattle, groceries, foodstuffs, and bringing stuff in. Even farmers get affected. There's no point in growing your own wheat anymore. You can buy flour cheaper than you can grow, in a package, cheaper than you can grow wheat, even if you have a farm. Packaged foodstuffs. In the 1890s, the country's flooded with packaged foodstuffs. And farmers are going to the groceries, the dry goods store for their groceries instead of growing it themselves. Armour comes along and you're shipping butchered meat. Well, actually, to start with, in the 1880s, you're shipping whole carcasses, frozen, to a butcher in Burlington. By 1900, you're shipping packaged meat to butchers. So the whole economy turns over and the railroad loses its purpose.
Well, also Vermont lost a tremendous amount of population after the Civil War.
Well, yes. On the other hand, it didn't lose any farms. There's a book about this. What happens is the average farmer wants to farm till he's about 50. By the time he's 50, his youngest son is ready to take over. So all his older kids got to go somewhere and find somewhere to live because he wants to run his farm. That's his life. So his youngest son, or maybe his youngest son-in-law, takes over the family farm. In the meantime, all his older kids need to go somewhere because they aren't going to get the farm. Dad doesn't want to give it up yet. So yeah, a lot of people move, but you have families of 5 and 6 and only one farm. So, you know, the economy turns over. In addition to that, by the 20s, and this really starts much earlier, by the 20s, small subsistence farmers can't make a living anymore if you're a hillside farmer. You need to be in the Champlain Valley, in the Connecticut River Valley, where you have good, rich soil. If you're a hillside farmer, you can't make it. So people are selling those farms, actually walking away from those farms and going out west. And what happens is that either out-of-towners with a lot of money, for that, you don't even need to be rich. If you make in the equivalent today of $150,000 a year, you can come up here and buy a hillside farm and use it for the summer. So if you're somewhere around middle class, you have enough money to do that if you want to. So hillside farmers are being abandoned. You can buy them maybe from the person who owns it, who's probably a grandson living in Connecticut who doesn't really want it. Or you can buy it at a tax sale for the back taxes, and you can get yourself a really cheap farm and be a gentleman farmer. Because those hillside farmers aren't supporting people anymore. Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. This has been an enormous pleasure for me.
Thank you.